Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another AHA webinar. I'm David Skabar, Chief Growth Officer at Amplify Advisors, and our purpose is driving sustainable growth, which is exactly why this topic matters. Most leadership teams don't lack ambition. They'll invest serious time and often serious dollars into an annual strategic planning process. The offsite is good, the deck is sharp, the priorities feel right, and then the year unfolds. Fires show up, the customer shifts, people change, capacity gets tight, and without realizing it, strategy quietly becomes a document you meant to execute rather than a system the business actually runs on. That's the failure point. Strategy treated as an event instead of an operating discipline, with no mechanism to adapt as conditions change. Today is built for entrepreneurs, CEOs, and finance leaders who want strategy to show up in how the business runs, not just how it's planned. We're going to cover why strategy fails in entrepreneurial companies, how to shift from planning to execution, how to build alignment and accountability, the role of metrics and KPIs, and specifically the finance leader's role in making all of this stick. I'm excited for this one because we're joined by two strategy experts from Ventrek, a Calgary-based firm that works with entrepreneurial teams to help them build stronger, more aligned, and more effective companies. I want to introduce our guests today. First, Peter Zyla. Peter is the founder and chief strategist at Ventrek. Part of what makes Peter's perspective valuable is that he's spent his career at the leadership table, not just advising on strategy, but operating inside high growth businesses, often wearing both strategy and operations hats. Through that experience, he's developed what he calls the Ventrek strategy system, a practical approach to helping companies get clear on that vision, define their strategy, and most importantly, actually execute against it in a disciplined way. He's facilitated thousands of strategy and execution sessions and is known for bringing a very direct, practical lens to what can sometimes become overly theoretical conversations. And we're also joined by Andre Arata. Andre is a senior strategist at Ventrek and works closely with leadership teams to translate a strategy into execution, helping organizations build the structure, cadence, and accountability needed to actually make strategy stick. Andre spends a lot of his time working directly with clients, supporting them through implementation of the Ventrek system. So not just defining where they want to go, but building the rhythms and operating discipline required to get there. What I'm looking forward to from Andre today is that practitioner perspective, what this actually looks like inside real businesses and where things aren't always clean or predictable. Peter, Andre, bring you on the screen here. Welcome and thanks a million for joining us today.
Hey, David. Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for having me as well.
Oh, you got you on mute. Strategy starts falling apart when we can't hear you talk, Pete.
That's right. Pleasure to be here, guys. And hopefully you guys take away in the next hour some really good little tidbits to bring back to your companies. That's our goal here. We're practical people, so let's make this practical.
I love it. So we spent quite a bit of time together working directly with us and gotten to know you guys. And like I say, I love the really practical approach and the kind of no BS mentality and calling it like you see it. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes through that lens. Awesome. So maybe a good place to start is, maybe when you first walk into a company, they're looking for support with strategy and they say, our strategy is not working. What's usually broken, or what's some of the symptoms that you see there when you first walk into one of those organizations?
Yeah, there's a few things, right? Like everybody's told to do strategy, right? Strategy. Everybody do strategy. Strategic planning. Everybody do strategic planning. Everybody gets aligned and they go to the hotel, the nice hotel, and they eat lots of food and they talk about lots of things. And then at the end of 2 days, everybody's excited. And then 6 months later, it's like, what happened to our strategy? Exactly. So often it falls off the rails, and that's when people typically come to us. They're like, I don't know what happened. I thought we did everything right. So we see a few things, David, like high level errors that we see are a few things. I think number one, and these aren't necessarily in order of priority, but I think number one is that a lot of people fail to match analysis with their actual strategy. So in a strategic methodology, in Ventrek, we have 4 pieces. We have analyze, craft, implement, and monitor in our world. And that's our world, how we implement strategy. When we see a lot of clients, we see them do an analysis like a SWOT or a competitor analysis. We've all done them. Everybody in this room has probably done it. And they've done these things, but what we see often is the disconnect between taking the analysis, this internal and external analysis and applying it to the strategy. So that's, I think, number one, is failing to match their analysis, their internal weaknesses or their strengths, and actually developing a strategy. They do the analysis section and the strategy section, and then the end of the day, they never look back on this analysis, which is a big mistake. So if I can encourage everybody today, is that mistake number one is try to ensure that whatever you identify as key internal and external opportunities is mirrored in your strategy. So that's number one. David, would you like a few more?
Well, it's funny where my head goes right away there is obviously in the world of accounting and finance. It's kind of like, well, you set a budget and then you never look back at it.
That's right.
So there's some synergies there.
Yeah, that's a very good. It's an absolutely good parallel, right? And then I think a big thing too is like, we're ambitious people, especially entrepreneurs. That's our world we live in, and that's the world you live in. And entrepreneurs are ambitious people. They see their analysis now. Okay, here's what opportunities, here's threats, here's what's hits and misses, and here's strengths, and start doing and stop doing. They do this analysis, and then they say, let's do it all. And everybody's like, oh my God, how are we going to possibly do this all? And they take on, 7, 8, 10 strategic objectives for the year. We've seen this. In fact, I think Andre dealt with one client that had something like 12 or 15 strategic objectives for the year. It's untenable. It's not doable. You can't do it. So I think one of the big things, and folks, if you can take away from this AHA seminar, is strategy has to be deliberate, and sometimes you have to choose what not to do. So strategy is often choosing what not to do, which is a weird way to frame it, David? To look at it that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of shiny objects, and sometimes that quick path to revenue or that blue sky over there can be really, really attractive, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a big mistake. People just take on too much, and then they fail, and then they're back at the drawing board. So staying isolated, we coach our clients to maybe 5 strategic objectives for the year, and that's it. And it's uncomfortable because you're like, well, what about that thing? And what about that thing? Well, no. You can't do it. You got to prioritize. So I think that's a big one, for sure.
FOMO in the business lens, for sure. But if we're only doing these 3 or 4 things, how can we be actually moving the needle? But well said, for sure.
Yeah. And I think the third one, so once you get better at that analysis and stuff like that, and once you are better at isolating and trimming it down and stuff like that, I think the next mistake we see often is people want strategy to be sexy out of the gate, and it's not. So our early clients, we call these, 1 to 3 year clients, first, second, third year clients. Strategy is a grindy, dirty, messy, get your house in order kind of thing. So we see people that want to jump to sexy strategy like acquisitions and geographic expansion and, all this other sexy stuff in strategy, and their house isn't in order. And in our experience, your first 1 or 3 years of strategy is typically building the house for that growth, so that you can take on that growth. You can take on the acquisitions. You can start to spread it to departments and all this other really cool stuff. So I think we see that often, and we coach our clients. I know it's a grind, but you got to get your HR department sorted out or this sorted out before we get chase acquisitions and all that other stuff.
So those honest conversations early days, they got to be, there's probably a lot of discomfort that happens and comes along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the discomfort comes here too, David, is, and this would be probably mistake number 4 or whatever we're at, is, okay, we have a plan. Now they're, so they did the analysis, they stayed focused, they have a handful of objectives, they didn't chase the shiny stuff, they stayed true to some of the stuff they got fixed. And now guess what, David? They don't assign accountability, or worse yet, they assign accountability and they don't hold people accountable. And I'm sure everybody in this seminar, if we could see hands up, has anybody been in this environment where accountability is not applied or doesn't been chased down? And I'm sure everybody put their hands up. So we see that a lot. It's like, okay, we got the plan. David, are you doing that? I ain't doing I didn't agree with that. That's not my, that's Andre's responsibility. Andre did that. So assigning accountability, and then David, what we do in our quarterlies is we check back on accountability. And if people aren't doing the work, well, hard decisions have to be made. So I think that's a big mistake. We see in a lot of clients is failing to assign accountability. And then if they do, not holding people accountable.
Yeah, business as usual versus, incorporating what business as usual looks like into those objectives, I'm sure, for sure.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some of the big ones for sure, right? Typically the top 4 or 5 that we see. And then, obviously, because we're talking to finance people in this room, which I love, is probably mistake number 5. And this is the last one we'll talk about real quick here is, the role of KPIs and metrics. And we're coming to that in our discussion a little bit later, but failing to apply numbers to the strategic plan is often a break. So you have a beautiful strategic plan, but if budgeting and numbers are not matching into this, then we definitely have a problem with the strategy side of things, for sure.
Right. Yeah, something to tie that North Star there, and to actually measure if you're making progress.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll turn it over to Andre for a second. Andre, would you see any other mistakes that we've seen from the dozens and dozens of clients we've dealt with?
You know what? I don't know if it would be a mistake, but it would maybe just be, they haven't learned it or implemented. It's the execution rhythm, right? So we've even if we've established this great strategy, we understand we need accountabilities with KPIs. We're limiting our overall objectives, but the aspect of the ongoing or continual rhythm, right, to check in is something that we often don't see either, right? So it is a really important part of what we try to bring is that discipline of execution rhythm, right? Bringing strategy into the operations.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So when you say, maintaining that rhythm, that would imply that you've gone from that strategy session, you've developed the strategy, you've got alignment at the leadership table, and you've got your priorities set. How do you initiate that when you do flip it to execution? It's one thing to see execution slipping, but now how is it to go from that, as you say, maybe it's the hotel lobby, everyone's having drinks, having a good time, debriefing a fantastic day, all this, big picture, exciting things that they're talking about. And now we're back to work on Monday. What does that look like?
Yeah. You want me to feel that, Andre?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, this is uncomfortable. And I think maybe some people in this seminar might be a little shocked that we actually track strategy weekly. So when we build strategy with clients, it moves from a 5-year mission to 3-year objectives to 1-year objectives to quarterly priorities, often called rocks in the strategy community. Lots of people use the concept of 90-day rocks. So what are these little rocks? These little bitty rocks over here that feed to the 1-year, that feed to the 3-year, that feed to the 5-year. And those little 90-day priorities are tracked every single week. And folks, you would not believe the strategic traction you get when you start to track those weekly. So, and you don't get them all done. Like our guidance for most of our clients is somewhere around 80%. If you can get 80% of your strategic priorities for the next 90 days done, that's awesome. We're pretty happy. And the traction you can get with that is amazing. So when we move from strategy planning, the plan to execution, it begins with setting those weekly priorities. We even break it down, David, to success criteria underneath that, which are, almost sub-weekly priorities, almost like a Gantt, a project chart type of thing. It's very similar to that. So that really holds people accountable. You can't hide in the system if you're tracking weekly and 90 days is up and you're like, oh, I didn't get anything done. Nobody is surprised. We know that you were failing on your rocks and stuff like that, or your strategic priorities for that quarter. That's number one we do. And then number two is we do a quarterly cadence as well. So we strongly recommend folks in this room, if you're doing your strategy with your companies, please ensure you do 90-day cadences. I think, the most successful of our clients, David, are very religious or disciplined in holding these weekly, quarterly, annual cadences. And if they're non-negotiable, they never change them, and they hold them really, almost religiously, so to speak. And it's a grind. Again, strategy becomes a bit of a grind, but after a year or two, you're like, oh my God, we tripled our revenue, or we did all this, and then I can't believe it. It's people are surprised at the end.
So with the weekly monitoring, and as you say, these 90-day check-ins, what's the significance around that 90 days? Is it to get ahead of the leaks before they become catastrophic, or what's the logic behind that kind of cadence if we're tracking it weekly anyways?
Yeah, a few things, man. Like, we're entrepreneurial companies. Most of our clients are entrepreneurial. Most of your clients are entrepreneurial companies. Things change. I mean, the world's evolving super fast, faster than any of us get predicting these days, but it's always kind of been that way. So a couple things. The 90-day, there's been studies on the ability to maintain a plan, and it starts to dwindle at that 60 to 90 days. So there is some logic. 60 would be ideal, but that seems a little too frequent to me. But there's some logic to get everybody in a room again, get them hyped up, that feeling after the annual, get them all excited again. So it's a bit of that emotional uplift because you've been grinding, so it's nice to kind of so number one is that. Number two is probably, it's not probably, but it is to check in on how we did. So how did we do? We said we were going to do all these things over the last 90 days. How did we do, guys? Well, we failed there. We did this one. That was good. And you kind of do a really reflective exercise every 90 days. That's what we do with all our clients. And I really encourage everybody on the seminar to do the same, is just reflect on those last 90 days. And we have some tricks like what's been working, what's not been working. Is there any emerging opportunities or risks that we should look at? Is there any replicable learnings from the quarter? So we have a little toolkit to help clients sort of analyze that quarter and see what was good. And then we usually do a day, David, for that quarterly. And then the second half of the day, and I recommend this for everybody, is now let's reset priorities because the world is changing. So our strategic plan that we made in an annual might have to be tweaked a little bit. And that's this opportunity every 90 days to come back together, look at what we did, and then redo or reforecast what we plan to do over the next 90 days. Exactly like budgeting. All you guys are finance people for the most part. It's exactly like budgeting. You got to reforecast once in a while on your budget if things change, right? So.
Right. Okay. Now, maybe Andre, over to you from your experience there. When we look back at those 90 days and we say, how are we doing? Is this through a subjective lens? Do you ensure that there's through an objective lens? How do you gauge the response in the question, how are you doing?
Yeah, I think there's, let's call it, two components to it. As Pete touched on, there is an aspect of review, of let's look back. And of course, there's going to be some subjective nature to that. I mean, one is just there's some time latency that would just, you forget sometimes, but we also do it within a team environment. So there's the opportunity for team members to either ask more questions, clarify, or even to challenge, right? Whatever I saw, perhaps Pete didn't see. And so we have a bit of discussion. We can get to some clarity around it, and we can also create that clarity for the overall team. Additionally, we've touched on the component of having rocks, the quarterly priorities. So if we're setting up our objectives and our rocks clearly, we can start to see what actually got done. So it shouldn't be an aspect of, I just want to be better. It should be a component of, I want to improve my efficiency by a percentage or so. That translates into the wording, but it also should translate into the metrics. So if we have the right metrics and or scorecard information, which is our weekly review, we should start to see that we are on or off track. So there are methodologies that we would take forward that would allow it to be less subjective and more objective. Does that, Pete, do you want to add to that? Is that?
No, good.
Yeah, I love it. You kind of a few times there you alluded to kind of the components of the system. Of course, now we're talking about the cadence of our meetings. We're meeting weekly and quarterly. Now you introduced this scorecard and and the accountability piece, of course, to that. How do those pieces all kind of fit together, and how does it manifest for a leadership team of a small medium business when they do come back to you at that 90-day mark?
Pete, do you want to go into that, or do you want me
to?
to?
Ahead, sir. You're doing a great job. I'm going to take a break there. I'm going to go get a coffee and a donut or something.
So from our perspective, right, and what we feel and what's been demonstrated to be most effective is we have the team working together. So there's continuity of information in our sessions. Of course, when we come to accountabilities, right, we do assign specific objectives, rocks to individuals, as well as the metrics to individuals. And it's not to say that this is something that we're using to blame. This is about elevating trends, looking for opportunities. And we're doing that within the environment where the entire team can be part of that process. Yeah. So it's not only now me being accountable for myself, which is absolutely critical in the system, but it's also me being accountable to the team, right? And that's really what we're trying to get into, is that cadence of reviews. So we understand that this is a team environment. And then the discussion around what's happening, let's call it working, not working, etc., is now just elevating some of the ideas or some of the things that are getting in our way, right? What's stopping us potentially from being more efficient or effective in our execution? I don't know if that gives you what you're looking at.
Can I add on to that for a sec, David?
Yes, please do.
So I don't know how many people on this seminar read the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It's pretty famous. It's a good read. I recommend it. It's pretty short. In there's 5 components of dysfunction, trust, commitment, et cetera, accountability. But there's a very important point in there. And dysfunctional teams rely on the leader to hold people accountable. And this is very important point. And dysfunctional teams, let me just repeat that, tend to rely on the leader to hold people accountable. Highly functioning teams tend to have peers holding each other accountable. So if Dave and I are working together and Dave is missing on his strategic priorities for the quarter, it's not, say, Andre's the boss job to call David out. It's also mine. And those are highly functioning teams that we deal with. It's like David's answering to me as well as a peer for his strategic priorities to be executed. So I think that's a brilliant point that Andre brought up, is that holding people accountable, but it's the peer, that dynamic that's also holding people accountable.
And right. Pete, if I can add to a little bit of that, this all comes back to a part that we haven't even touched on, which is we're creating this culture, right? We are creating this culture of accountability. So it's again, as Pete said, it's not about one person doing it. It's about all of us being quality centers, and that becomes part of our culture, how we operate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, quality centers. And I mean, from that perspective, like, how does that manifest when your peers are holding each other accountable? Is that something like, hey, look, when we met, we all agreed that this was our 5-year mission, and these are our 3-year objectives to help us get there. So what are we doing today? We all agreed that this was the process, and now this is holding us back. How can I support you? What is that? How does that dysfunction, if you will, how does that play out in real life?
Yeah.
There could be some tough eyeball to eyeball conversations there, I imagine.
Oh yeah, definitely. Here's a few things we've observed from our clients over the years is, number one, everybody has a bad quarter. So I have a rough quarter, whatever, something personal might be going on, whatever it may be. Everybody's allowed a rough quarter. That's what we see. So you're allowed tolerance of that. And number two, here's a very interesting dynamic. We dealt with a client for a few years, and one of their leadership team members, David, never got their rocks done. Okay, never got their quarterly priorities done. I personally talked to the CEO, the leader, and I said, listen, this this gentleman's just not performing on your leadership team. He's just failing you over and over. Now, in our world, most of our clients are kind, gentle people that are generally concerned about their people. And so it's hard for them to let people go, especially on their leadership team, especially a friend on their leadership team. So he held on to him. And I'll tell you what happens in that session, David. So there's about 8 leadership team members on that around that table. We're all up there. We're sorting quarterly priorities. We're saying, okay, we got to get this done. We got to get this done. And then we start to assign responsibilities. And when it came to that gentleman, call him Mr. X, Mr. X was going to take that responsibility. You know what the body language was in the room? Everybody's just like this. So the entire leadership team had checked out and had lost faith in the process, lost faith in his ability to do something. And that kills companies like so fast, right? Super fast. So the system is built to have that peer dynamic, and then you need to perform, or unfortunately, you're off our team.
Yeah, is it okay if I add to that a little bit,
Yeah,
David?
Yeah, of course.
The thought process comes down to there's a company that has a life. There's us as individuals that have a life in the company, and then there's us as teammates that have a life in a company. And I think there are times when the leadership doesn't consider the fact that it is our job to take care of the company that has a life. The company can't take care of itself. It needs us to take care of it. So that's part of the thought or the philosophy that we can bring in is, hey, right, the company needs our attention as well. And it is our job to steward the company, right? And we're helping with the tools to bring that forward.
Yeah, interesting. Now, from that perspective, then, how do you, in that environment, you're all stewards of this business, and so inherently there could be almost a bureaucracy that exists. How do you ensure that you do have clear ownership on those priorities, and how can that same person that's got ownership then look to support from the, maybe bureaucracy isn't the right turn of phrase, but from the greater group?
Yeah, definitely bureaucracy. We don't play in that world, that's for sure. We don't have any government clients, knock on wood.
Yeah.
So far so good. But it all begins with having clear roles and responsibilities. Like that precedes strategy. I've often said structured precedes strategy. So we rarely do a strategy session until the structure of the organization is set. It's really hard to do strategy and then say, okay, who's going to be doing this? I don't know. Who's responsible for it? I don't know. I thought you were. So we say structure precedes strategy in our world. So have your structure sorted. Now you have clear swim lanes, David? So who's responsible for sales and marketing? Who's responsible for finance and accounting? And who's responsible for admin and HR and operations and da-da-da-da-da. And then when you have that structure and it's clear and it's transparent, it's way easier to apply strategy then, because now you have clear lines of authority. So when a strategic priority, aka a quarterly rock, comes up, and it has to do with, we need to introduce some process improvements and it's pretty clear where it needs to reside and who has to take that responsibility. So that's a strong recommendation of ours, and hopefully everybody in this seminar can take that away. If you are thinking of doing some strategic planning soon, make sure your structure is clear first.
Yeah.
So when you say your structure is clear, a structure can be clear internally because they, of course, have all of the institutional knowledge of that business, and then they show up at your desk, and maybe there's a misalignment there. How do you approach what appears or what they believe to be a clear structure and roles and responsibilities, and you've got a differing perspective?
Yeah, it doesn't happen too often though, I gotta be honest, David. Like when we deal with our clients, usually we get that up beforehand. So it's part of the due diligence before we do any strategic planning to make sure that structure is in place. And there's always some gray areas. We all know that. We're talking SMBs here, right? There's going to be overlap in gray areas, and we tolerate that. Strategy is not perfect. Like There's going to be some gray overlap areas, and that's discussed in these rooms. That's the beauty of it, of a 2-day annual and a quarterly monitor session, is you're discussing in the room, and sometimes people put their hands up and says, I can take this for you this quarter. I mean, listen, roles and responsibilities cross sometimes, and it's okay to help each other. And we see that a lot. It's like, you know what, I got bandwidth this quarter, and it's typically, you know, the boss that has that kind of rogue role. They'll jump into various areas and help as needed. I'll take and help you here, and da 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 da. Right? That's typically what we see.
Right. I think it's well said, especially in that small medium business segment. You know, you've got that owner operator that is not only your best sales guy, but he's also he or she are leading the culture of the organization. They're probably also the best operator in the organization, but creating that capacity to, you know, fit into the roles and responsibilities chart to, you know, start to elevate other people at the executive table is probably pretty critical, of course.
Yeah, the biggest thing is always elevating. Like, we try to elevate people in strategy. Like, in our definition of strategy, right? Strategy is the allocation of resources towards a desired outcome. So it's applying time and money to achieve a desired end game. And that's typically your 5-year mission, along with some company strengthening. So when we get in the weeds a bit, we try to elevate our clients up, back up. It just says, take a deep breath. Stop the grind. Remember what we're trying to aspire towards as an organization. That often helps reframe things a little bit.
Right. It's that delicate balance between, is this urgent or important?
Right.
Or, you know, that hierarchy for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew, I cut you off there.
No, not at all. I was actually probably cutting you guys off. But, you know, there's something that I'd like to bring forward, which is when you start to see aspects of, let's call it, misalignment, because there can be misalignment, as Pete just said, at the role level, right? At the roles and responsibilities level. But there can also be misalignment even at the quarterly rocks objective, where you might take on an objective or a rock and not realize how much work actually goes into it.
Right.
Right. Or my definition of what, let's call it, done is, if we're not clear on how things are defined, my definition of done might be different than Pete or your definition of done. So now we've got 3 opinions on how we did with our priorities in the quarter. And that, again, it all comes back to this clarity, whether it's the swim lanes, the objectives, the quarterly rocks, and even, you know, the mini milestones, the success criteria that we're looking at. Those all need to be pretty clear, because we're all good people. Everyone wants to do well. Everyone wants to help.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, when we're sitting in there and creating these what wants to get done, and your definition of done actually, in my experience and great learning opportunities, is how do you actually get started? Because if you're starting with the end in mind, it's this big, fantastic output. But if those success criteria that you haven't established along the way aren't getting you in the path which was agreed upon in that room, you're setting yourself up for that slippage that we discussed earlier.
Yeah. So
no,
that's
Okay, so moving from there, kind of going from the roles and responsibilities, laddering up to the strategy sessions and who's accountable for what, leaving those strategy sessions. How, when we get into the scoreboard and the scorecard and how we're actually doing, what are some common kind of KPI or metrics that you see people making in terms of whether there's too many, not enough? Are they the wrong ones? Are they leading indicators, lagging indicators? What are some common mistakes there? Because oftentimes, you know, we hear people saying, like, we've got a strategy and we're tracking it based on this scorecard.
Yeah, this is good. So this comes into the finance world, I think, personally. This is where a lot of people in the seminar need to step up in their strategy. And I think Ken is in this seminar, and Ken Sifroa, I'm just going to throw that out. So cash flow return on assets. So we have a lot of different clients, and there's a few things. So number one, we also have weekly scorecard items, so KPIs, and I'll talk about the what in a minute, that feed typically into quarterly, that feed typically into annual, etc. Now, we're talking to finance crowd, so everybody's comfortable with numbers and budgeting and stuff like that. So that's number one. But the finance person, in my estimation, in terms of applying KPIs, has to find what, Jim Collins might have said, the profit per X, or that one number that's critical to the business that's really going to help them succeed, David. Like, I love that concept. It's notoriously hard to apply in our experience. Like, maybe 1 in 10 companies are successfully applying that one number or that key metric. And the reason I brought Safroa up is one of our clients is that, they offer rental equipment. So they have a very huge inventory of assets, obviously, and it's all rental assets, right? So they rent it to the oil and gas industry. And one of their key metrics is cash flow return on assets. And that arrived simply from a very astute finance seat coming up with that in the meeting, saying this has to be part of our strategic priorities, is maximizing Safroa. And so as a strategist, I love it, because now my finance is collaborating in that direction in the metrics. I absolutely love it.
So the one number metric, can you expand on that for our participants who may not be quite as familiar? Because
like Jim Collins,
what number are we talking about? There's so many numbers.
I know. Well, Jim Collins called it profit per X, and I think you don't have to be profit per X. So Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, I'm sure a few people read. There's this concept called profit per X, and he says that the great companies understand their profit per X really well. So Walgreens profit per store, or profit per square foot, or Starbucks profit per block, or profit per customer, or profit for geographic area. There's a million profit per X's, right? So I think what I would encourage this room to understand is trying to uncover what is the actual most important one number for your business. So the analogy I just used was obviously the cash flow return on assets for a heavy rental company. That's very apropos. But another company, we have a few companies that have one numbers, right? It's ad spend. So we have a number of customer B2C, so B2C based clients. So they use customer acquisition costs. So bringing in ad spend and how many people are calling, and then how many appointments are they booking for their home comfort, and then moving through that. So that one number, it's so tricky, but I would love to encourage this seminar to just have a glass of wine tonight and think about their one number for their companies that they represent, because it is a pretty cool exercise.
I couldn't help but notice all these one numbers were actually a combination of two numbers,
Right.
the cost per this. So it's kind of a workaround. If you're really struggling to find one number, just make it per something else, and then you can get two critical values in there.
Yeah, I mean, I wish Ken can show us right now. I think he's on here, but he could show us the equations for cash flow return on assets. There's about 8 numbers in that.
It takes big brains to come up with that, but sometimes the best strategy, of course, is thinking of it from that simplistic lens. Don't overcomplicate it, because then you lose track of the actual behaviors that you're trying to drive from these metrics.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Dave, to cut you off, but I think that's a very important point. The dance between strategy and metrics and KPIs, I've always said that they're two parallel lines dancing together. So, some companies are super strong financially. They have budgets and measures and forecasting and all that other stuff, but they just don't have strategic objectives and initiatives that are mirroring the company's priorities. And when these two start to dance together, it's a beautiful thing. So that's what we want to strengthen in our clients, is strengthen your pure strategy and complement it with a pure, strong, strategic financial KPIs and metrics that measure,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, go ahead, Andre.
I was just going to say, the easiest way to say it or summarize it is what gets measured gets done, right? Typically, if we're focusing on it, it gets done. And I think a big part of that financial leadership comes from the finance team, which is all about driving value. And I think it becomes a bigger part of that financial group to create the measurable awareness. Right? So what gets measured gets done.
Okay, so that's great in theory. And again, this is less about theory than it is actual practicality and what happens in the real world. Now a team has a scorecard. It's reporting these metrics that we all agreed on, but now we're not executing. What's missing? What's going on?
You just leave it. You don't worry about it.
Okay, great.
Just
great.
let it go.
Anyways, thanks. It's been great.
There's like, this is, I mean, that's a really hard question, to be honest, because not one single client will have green across a given scorecard all the time, and nobody. And almost every single client we have asks that exact same question, David. Well, listen, we're red 3 weeks in a row or 4 weeks in a row on revenue or leads or whatever the hell the number is. And that's a tough one. I mean, there's two things: either the number's wrong or the person's wrong. In our experience, or the process is wrong. Typically those three things, right? The number's wrong, the person's wrong, and the process is wrong. So it's for SMBs, David, I gotta say, you've got to tolerate that little red stuff here and there. Now, long term you can't, but it's not all roses all the time. And that's the only advice I have. I don't know if Andre can add to that, but every single client, I've never seen a perfect, beautiful scorecard that's met every time we meet. Never, ever have I seen it.
No, but we might encourage, again, it depends on the specifics of the situation, David. But I mean, sometimes you can go into the weekly meeting. There may be a bunch of red on one or two items. And that's where we would encourage people, we won't talk about it here, but just to go through, an ideation session or a solving session, right? Which we would call the IDS. So it's creating it as an opportunity or a topic or a parking lot item, an issue, and then being able to unpack it with the team. So we can put everyone's brains together and try to come up with maybe larger ideas than one person can come up with. So, right. I mean, I can speak specifically about, a recent session. It was probably about a month and a half ago, where it was indicated, this was at a quarterly monitor, that sales was already off track from the annual budget. And the comment became, well, it's outside of our control. Outside of our control, can't do anything about it. We just got to live with it. And I had to say, I don't think that's acceptable. We can't go on for 3 months at a time saying, oh, nothing I can do about it. There's always something we can do about it. So we actually started to just generate ideas around what are all the specific actions we could be taking as part of the operations and sales team. And that generated a number of activities, or at least a specific objective within, within success criteria within it, that then goes to drive, right, that behavior, which is, let's get back on track for sales.
All right, and start to drive that accountability.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Now, it's interesting, kind of pivoting from that sales anecdote, and given obviously the breadth of experience and expertise in this room, primarily of the accounting and finance types, talking about, there's a natural tendency, of course, to consider the finance leader owning the forecasting or the budgeting and all the things that are critical in tracking from an accounting and finance lens. In your experience, what should finance own in this system? What should they dig their hands into in terms of a tracking and auditing and reporting perspective, but as a strategy, as a framework, not just through their accounting and finance lens?
Can I share some at this time, Brian or David?
Pardon me?
Can I share something at this time?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let me share a couple of things with you folks. I really appreciate these two things. This might help frame exactly what David was just asking about here. So there's a couple of things I'm going to share here real quick. Is This comes from the book called Entrepreneur Numbers. And if you guys are dealing with small to mid-sized businesses, I really encourage you guys to read this book. But this is from the book
Can you give
Entrepreneur
us a
Numbers.
zoom? Can you give us a zoom in on that bottom right a little bit?
That help?
Yeah, that's helping. Absolutely.
Oops.
Provided you can see. There you go. Maybe a little too much.
So yeah,
There you
I love this model. I'm not going to go to it in detail. Grab the book. It's a quick read, but I really like this as it applies to strategy. So this is my finance and accounting seats. And it very typically early stage clients that are getting involved in strategy, they reside in this transactional hygiene finance and accounting world, David. You know, they probably have an accounting bookkeeper and they're probably decent at the hygiene functions of AR, AP, and stuff like that. But in our experience, as you evolve in strategy, especially in the finance and accounting seat, this should be your roadmap towards evolving with the company as it grows. So you move from transactional to, you know, more reporting and compliance to true financial strategy, which is, you know, financial modeling and analysis and acquisition due diligence stuff and you can read all this. I'm not going to go through it all, but you see the KPIs rise up, right? Rise from, say, you know, what's our over 90 ratio to, you know, let's do some downsheet analysis. And I mean, DDE is not that complicated, but, you know, more complicated, like down there's some flow and stuff like that. So I like this in terms of my expectations for the strategy seat. David, to your question, is you get your house in order and then migrate left. So again, I can't take credit. This is from the book Entrepreneur Numbers. Grab it, quick read with some really good little tidbits. So that's number one. And then number two is that I wanted to share with you guys what we do with every single client, every single year, this is what we call a financial canvas, okay? So we do this with all our clients. And it begins with the left-hand column here, or pardon me, the middle column, which is a relative strength. Now, strength is relative. You asked earlier about objective, subjective. This is a bit like, we're pretty good. So, you know, revenue, profit, we don't typically talk about. That's very transparent. But the rest of these is 100% strategy for the finance and accounting seat on our annuals, okay? So we look at the strength of the people. I mean, that's a hard one. You got to be a little self-reflective. Are we weak, medium, strong in our accounting department or our finance department? Financial reporting, you get the gist. And David, you can share this with the team later. I can send it to you and send it to the participants. And what we do, everybody, is we do a weak, medium, strong. So being super honest, how is our financing, et cetera, et cetera? How is all this look? And then what we do is, what's our relative priority? We typically just do 1 year. We say over the next 12 months, what are our relative priorities? And as I told you earlier in the day, strategy is about choosing what not to do. So if this is week, and everybody's like priority, well, you're dead in the water. We typically say 1 to 3 tops priorities for that year. So if your controls
So is that second column then a yes or no?
Yeah, exactly. We usually star it. Yeah, we usually just star it. So weak, medium, strong, star 1, maybe 2, 3 at the very outside. You know, like controls. Controls is typically, you know, pretty weak in SMBs, you know, credit card policies and money out the door and stuff like that. It could be weak, but we could be like, you know what? It's okay. Nobody's stealing money quite yet. Like, let's be okay with that. So between those two tools, moving from hygiene to insight, and then doing an annual, you know, financial canvas, what we call a financial canvas, this is powerful stuff for your finance seat. So we can share that tool with David, and he can share it with you guys.
That's sometimes when that left column, if there's a lot of weaks and mediums, I'm sure you're like a business therapist, you know, letting them off the hook. Look, it might not be a 1 year priority, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes just that pressure relief valve has to be well received.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's a great insight into the obviously the accounting and finance lens. Is there an element of the actual auditing and the behaviors in the strategy framework that the finance leader should own, should operate, should stay on top of, or is that still that collaborative approach, irrespective of their roles and responsibilities? I just feel like there's a natural tendency to, they've got the numbers, they've got the source of truth. Is there I've got the conch and I'm keeping everybody going?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for the strongest companies we work with, the finance is just one seat at the leadership team, and they all collaborate, right? They're all hands on deck, and the finance in our world, and our clients that are the strongest of the finance leaders are intimately aware of what the business is doing, the processes within the business, the operational teams, all that other stuff. It's very rare we see siloed functionality in our client base, and that's by design,